7 days. That was how long I had been a wife. The word still felt borrowed when I tried it in my mouth, the way a coat from someone else's closet hangs slightly wrong at the shoulders. My husband, Daniel. My husband. I rolled the syllables over my tongue as I climbed the narrow streets of the old town that afternoon, the sea breathing somewhere below us, salt in the air, late autumn light pressing the brick houses into pale gold. I had gone out for bread and a small wedge of manchego because Daniel had texted at lunch. Something special tonight. Wait for me. He'd put a little heart after it, the way he had since the night we met. He was a defense attorney at one of the older firms in the city. The wedding had been 6 days behind us. The honeymoon had been pushed to spring, his caseload, my fellowship at the museum. And we were still living in that strange, glittering antechamber where everything ordinary felt like a private joke between us. I was happy, properly happy, not the syrupy kind that turns to vinegar when you breathe on it, the quiet kind that you mistake for nothing at all because it doesn't ask for your attention. That is what makes it so easy to take away. The woman stepped out from the alley between the bookshop and the closed-up flower stall as though she had been waiting there a long time and had only just decided I was worth standing up for. She wore a wool coat the color of wet ash. Her hair was iron gray, pulled back tight enough to make her temples look raw. Her eyes, I remember, were the color of weak tea, and they did not blink. Mrs. Hart. I stopped because she used my new name, the one I had signed for the first time on a marriage license 7 days ago, the one almost no one in this city knew yet. I'd been Whitmore until last Saturday. Do I know you? I said. She came closer than a stranger should, close enough that I could smell the cold on her coat and something underneath it. Chamomile, maybe, or some herb I associated with sick rooms. Her hand, when it closed around my wrist, was dry as paper but startlingly strong. I felt the bones in my own arm align under her grip. Listen carefully, she said, because I will say this once, and then you will never see me again. Tonight your husband will come home with a bottle of champagne. He'll smile. He'll say he wants to celebrate your first week. He'll pour for you first. Do not drink from the glass he hands you when he turns his back, and he will turn his back for the cheese, for the napkins, for something. Exchange the glasses, quickly, without a sound, without a word. Drink from his, and in the morning you will understand everything. I tried to pull away. She did not let me. The grip wasn't violent, but it was complete, the way a closing door is complete. Who are you? I said. My voice came out thinner than I wanted. How do you? Don't ask. Don't tell him. Not one word. Do you understand me? Not one. If you tell him, what is coming will arrive faster than you can imagine. This is ridiculous. Bitter tears, Mrs. Hart. Her eyes were so still, it was like looking into water. Bitter tears and great misfortune. Unless you do, as I say. Then she let go and turned and walked away. And within 20 steps, the gray coat had folded itself into the rest of the late afternoon crowd, and I could not pick her out again. I stood there with my paper bag of bread against my hip and felt the place on my wrist where her fingers had been. It was warm. The rest of me was cold. A child ran past me, chasing a paper kite. A man at the corner laughed into his phone. A pigeon lifted off a windowsill in a clap of wings. The world went on, casual and busy, and inside me something narrow and dark had opened a door. A lunatic, I told myself, walking faster. The city is full of them. She probably says it to a dozen women a week, but she had known my name. But champagne was an ordinary gift. Any husband might bring it. But she had known my name. I made it back to the apartment building, with my heart still thudding in a low private rhythm I couldn't quiet. The wrought iron door of our building closed behind me with its usual heavy sigh. I climbed the 3 flights. I let myself in. I put the bread on the counter. I stood at the window for a long time looking down at the street, as if I might see her again. As if seeing her again would mean she was real, and not seeing her would mean she wasn't, and I wasn't sure which I wanted. The light in our kitchen was a pale honey color in the autumn afternoons. Everything in the apartment was new in the way things are when they have been chosen together. The copper pans hanging from a rail, the heavy ceramic bowls, the rug from his mother that we both pretended to like more than we did. On the windowsill there were still 2 cards from the wedding I hadn't put away, to Daniel and Eleanor. With every good wish, bitter tears, the words turned over slowly in my head, like coins. I told myself I would not think about it. I would chop vegetables and listen to music and laugh at myself by morning. I told myself a lot of things in the next hour. None of them held. He came home at 6:40, which was early for him. I heard his key in the lock the way I'd heard it every evening that week, and the small private flutter I always felt at the sound was there, and then under it, like a second heartbeat, was a smaller, colder thing. "Elle?" he called. "Kitchen." He came in carrying a paper sack and a bouquet of late dahlias, the color of bruised plums. He'd taken his tie off in the car. One end of it hung from his coat pocket. He had a way of arriving home that made the apartment seem to enlarge around him, as though the rooms had been holding their breath while he was gone. "You're early," I said. "I deserve to be." He set the bag on the counter with a quiet clink of glass and kissed me, holding the flowers awkwardly between us. "I made an executive decision. I am celebrating my wife. We've been married a full week, and I refuse to let it go unmarked." He pulled the bottle out. It was a champagne I knew the name of, a brut from a small house in the Loire, the same we had drunk on our second date when neither of us could afford it. He'd remembered. He always remembered. "Look at you," I said. My voice sounded normal. I was distantly proud of that. Romance. "Look at me," he agreed and grinned. And the grin was the same grin I'd been falling into for a year and a half, and I felt the floor of my stomach drop. The bottle was sealed. The foil capsule was unmarked, the wire cage intact, the cork seated tight beneath it. I noted these things the way you note the make of a car at an accident, automatically and without believing they will mean anything. "Get the good glasses," he said, shrugging out of his coat. "Not the everyday ones, the crystal. I got them down from the high cabinet, 2 flutes, identical my grandmother's, brought up from her house in Vermont after she died last spring. Identical. Good. That was good." He set the dahlias in a jug of water. He washed his hands. He told me about his afternoon. A partner being difficult, a witness who'd changed her story, an associate who'd ordered the wrong sandwiches for the conference room. The cadence of his voice was the cadence I knew. I made the right sounds in the right places. I was watching his hands. He undid the cage. He set his thumb against the cork. He turned the bottle, not the cork, the way he had been taught by some uncle when he was a teenager and had once recited to me with great seriousness. The cork eased free with a low domestic sigh. Not a pop he poured. He filled my glass first. The bubbles climbed in long, thin chains. He filled his own. "To us," he said, lifting it. "To the first of a great many weeks." I lifted mine. I smiled. I touched the rim to my lips. I did not drink. He drank. Half the flute went down in one swallow. He closed his eyes for a second, the way he did with things he had been looking forward to all day. "God, that's good." He set his glass on the counter. "I'm going to grab the cheese. Did you get them in Chico?" "In the fridge." He turned. He opened the refrigerator. His back was a long straight line in the white cotton of his shirt. Exchanged the glass as I moved before I had decided to move. I would think, later, about the precision of it, the way my hands knew what to do, as though I had spent my life waiting for this small, treacherous instruction. I had worked tables in college, had carried 6 glasses at a time, knew the trick of a swift swap. The flutes shifted soundlessly between my palms. His half-empty glass came to my side of the counter. My full glass, full untouched, slid into the place where his had stood. I tipped a splash from the bottle into the half-empty one until the levels matched, more or less. I set the bottle down. I breathed. He came back with the cheese on a wooden board, with a knife, with the small jar of fig preserves he'd bought somewhere downtown. He set everything on the counter. He picked up his glass. He picked up my glass. He didn't notice. Why would he? 2 flutes, 1 shirt away from each other on a counter in a kitchen, in an apartment, in a building on a quiet street, in a town where nothing bad was supposed to happen to people like us. He lifted it. Once more, to my wife. "May there never be a reason for either of us to weep." I touched my glass, his glass, to his, and the high pure note of crystal sang once and faded, and I sipped, and the champagne tasted of dry apples and yeast and money, and nothing else. Nothing at all. He drank deeper than I did. He always had. He set the flute down and reached for the cheese knife and asked me something about my mother. And I answered him, and we were a married couple in our kitchen on a Tuesday in October. I watched his face. I watched the small flush rise in his cheeks the way it always did with the first glass of anything. I watched his eyes brighten. I watched him laugh at something I said and reach across the counter to brush my hair back behind my ear. "Stop," I thought. "Stop now." Make him stop. I did not stop him. We ate at the kitchen counter because we still hadn't bought stools that matched, and our small dining table was covered in wedding cards we hadn't finished writing thank you notes for. He told me a story about a deposition. I laughed in the right places. He poured himself a second glass. I touched mine to my lips and did not drink it. After dinner, he put on the record we had used for our first dance, an old Chet Baker, the one where his voice cracks like soft wood, and pulled me into the living room and held me by the waist, and we turned slowly in the small space between the couch and the bookshelf. He smelled of champagne and of the cologne I had bought him last Christmas, and of his own skin, which I knew now the way you know the inside of your own mouth. "You're somewhere else tonight," he murmured into my hair. "I'm tired. You sure that's all? And happy, I said, tired and happy. He kissed the crown of my head. Sometimes I think I should pinch myself, he said. I keep waiting for you to come to your senses and run off with someone more interesting. You are the most interesting, I said. And it was true, and I hated him a little for being true. He fell asleep before I did. He was warm against my back, an arm slung across my ribs, his breath even and unhurried at the nape of my neck. The bedroom was dark except for the streetlight bleeding through the gap between the curtains. I lay very still and listened to him, breathed and counted the breaths and waited. Every cough, every small adjustment of his body, every catch in his sleep. I felt each of them like a stone dropped into deep water. I tried to remember every face he had ever shown me. I tried to find the moment when the man I knew might have been replaced by the man who would do this. I could not find it. That was what frightened me the most. There was no seam. The clock on the dresser said 1, then 2, then 3. At 3:15, the wind picked up, and the sash window in the kitchen began to rattle in its frame, and I almost got out of bed to wedge it. But I was afraid to leave him, and I was afraid of him, and I lay there caught between the two, like a moth on a pin. I must have slept eventually, because I had the dream. The gray-coated woman was at the end of a corridor I could not place, long and narrow, full of doors, the floor tiled in a pattern that hurt to look at. She was not whispering this time. She was screaming, her mouth opening too wide, her hands flung up. Exchange the glasses, exchange them. Exchange. I woke at 7 because Daniel had moved. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with his head bent forward, both palms pressed to his temples. The light in the room was the pale gray of an overcast morning. His back, bare above the band of his pajama pants, had a thin sheen of sweat on it. Daniel? My head, he said. His voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again. My head is, God, it's spinning. It feels, I don't know, like the room isn't quite the right way up. I sat up too fast. The blood went out of my face. Are you sick? I don't know. I don't think He stopped, swallowed, made a small disgusted sound. I feel strange. My mouth tastes like metal. Was the cheese? The cheese was fine. I ate it. He laughed weakly. Maybe I'm getting old. 1 glass of champagne and I'm a wreck. He stood up. His legs went out from under him almost at once. He caught himself on the corner of the dresser with a hard scrape of his palm. I was off the bed in a second, my arm under his. Sit down, Daniel, sit, I'm fine, just bathroom. He made it to the bathroom. I heard the tap. I heard him spit. I heard him retch the soft, humiliated cough of a man trying to be quiet about it. I stood in the middle of the bedroom with my hands at my mouth. He came back paler than the sheets. His lips had gone the color of putty. There was sweat at his hairline. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and he looked at me with an expression I could not name, and he said, I don't feel right. I really don't feel right. I called the ambulance. The next hours arranged themselves around me, without my participation, the way water arranges itself around a stone. The paramedics, a woman with a tight braid, a man with kind, tired eyes, asking questions, taking his pulse, asking what he'd eaten, what he'd drunk when it had started, me handing them the bottle, me handing them the 2 flutes, the woman with the braid looking at me for a second longer than she needed to, and then looking away. The ride to the hospital, Daniel on the stretcher, me holding his hand. His grip had no strength in it. At one point his eyes opened wide and he said very clearly as though he had been saving it for me, if anything happens, you know that I love you, I said. Yes, I did not say, do I? The bitter tears the woman had promised arrived in the back of the ambulance, silent, running down sideways into my hair because I was bent over his hand. The paramedic with the braid put a small clean tissue into my free palm without looking at me, the way a nurse passes an instrument. At the hospital they took him through doors I was not allowed to follow. A clerk gave me a clipboard. I sat in a green vinyl chair in a corridor that smelled like floor polish and stale coffee, and I filled in his date of birth and his blood type and his allergies. Penicillin, mild, and his next of kin, which was now me. A toxicologist came out 2 hours later. Older man, deep lines around his mouth. The kind of doctor who had stopped softening his news a long time ago. Mrs. Hart, yes, your husband is stable. We've induced vomiting, we're running fluids, we've started him on activated charcoal. We've taken bloods. I want to be straightforward with you. This looks like poisoning. By the champagne? That's what we're going to find out. We've sent the bottle and the glasses to the lab. We'll know within 24 hours, probably sooner. In the meantime, he paused. His eyes had a careful neutrality I recognized as practiced. In the meantime, the hospital is required to inform the police. They may want to speak with you. Of course, Mrs. Hart, he hesitated. Did anyone other than you and your husband have access to that bottle? I thought about it. I thought about it for a long, long second. I don't know, I said. I don't know what he did before he came home. The doctor nodded slowly, as if I had said the correct thing for entirely the wrong reasons, and went away. I called his mother. Margaret arrived within the hour, ashen in a coat she had clearly pulled on over her nightgown. She held me, she wept. She asked me what had happened, in a voice that had a slight pitch of accusation under it, that I tried not to hear, because she was his mother, and because mothers will look first at the woman who was supposed to be keeping their son safe. He slept, I sat. The light through the small high window moved across the foot of the bed and onto the wall, and eventually off the wall altogether. The detective came at 5. He was a stocky, soft-spoken man named Reyes with very tidy hands. He took me to a small consultation room with 2 plastic chairs and a tissue box on the table, and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. I told him about the woman on Beacon Street. I watched his face for the moment when he would stop taking me seriously, and it didn't come. He wrote it all down. He asked me to describe her. He asked me to describe her 3 different times, in 3 different orders. He asked me what I had been wearing. He asked me, very gently, whether I had ever met her before. He asked me whether I had told anyone. No, I said. She said not to. And you exchanged the glasses. Yes. While he had his back turned. Yes. And the glass he ended up drinking, the one that was originally yours, that's the one we'll likely find the higher concentration in. I assume so. I don't know. He set his pen down. He looked at me for what felt like a long time. Mrs. Hart, he said, I want you to listen carefully. I believe you. I'm telling you that because in a minute, I'm going to ask you some questions you may not like, and I need you to answer them anyway. Either your husband tried to kill you, and you saved your own life, or someone else tried to kill you and used him to do it. In either case, until I know which it is, you need to assume you are not safe. Do you understand me? I understood him. I went back to Daniel's room. He was awake. Margaret had gone down to the cafeteria for coffee. The room was very quiet. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking, and then he said in a voice almost too soft to hear, It wasn't me, Elle. I sat down in the chair by the bed. I know what you must be thinking, he said. I know what it looks like. I bought the bottle, I poured the glasses, I'm the obvious person. But it wasn't me. I swear to you on anything you want me to swear on. It wasn't me. Then who? He closed his eyes. I watched his throat work. Her name is Vivienne, he said, Vivienne Croft. We were together for 2 years. We broke up this spring before I met you. He told me slowly, in fragments. He told me the way a man removes a splinter that has been in his hand so long the skin has grown around it. Vivienne had not taken the ending well. She had been the one who had said she wanted out. In fact, she had been the one who had ended it in a fight, in a restaurant over something he could no longer remember. But she had ended it the way some people end things, as a kind of test, expecting to be argued back into the room. He had not argued. He had let her go. He had been quietly relieved to let her go, and she had never quite forgiven him for it. In the months that followed, she had called. Then she had emailed. Then she had stopped, and he had thought she was finally done. And then he had met me at a friend's gallery opening, and he had been so completely overtaken by what came next that he had let Vivienne fall out of his head almost entirely. By the time he had asked me to marry him in the spring, Vivienne was a story he hadn't quite gotten around to telling. But she had not stopped watching. When the engagement notice had gone up on his firm's website, she had written to him a long email, civil at first, then increasingly not. She had used the word humiliation. She had said, You don't get to be happy. Not with her. Not with anyone, she had said. I will not stand by and watch this. He had blocked her. She had written from other addresses, from numbers he didn't know. He had blocked all of those too. He had been about to tell me, he said, the week before the wedding. And then his mother had had her heart scare, and the wedding had nearly been postponed, and the right moment had simply never come. And then the wedding had happened, and we had been happy, and he had really foolishly thought, that he could outwait her, that she would burn out. Then 4 days ago, she had texted him from another new number. She had said, I want to see you once just to put this to bed. And then I'll go. He had gone yesterday at lunch. He had gone, he said, because he had thought it was the only way to be sure she was finally done. He had met her at a coffee shop near her work. She was a process chemist at a biotech firm in the research park, he said, almost apologetically, as though the detail were incidental. And they had talked for 40 minutes. And at the end of it, she had smiled at him in a way that had not matched anything else about the conversation. And he had walked out feeling, for the first time in months, that the thing was actually over. He had stopped at the wine shop on the way home. He had bought the Brut. Was the bottle out of your sight? I asked. At any point between the shop and the apartment? No. Are you sure? It was in my bag. The bag was on the passenger seat. I didn't stop. Was she with you in the wine shop? He looked at me, his face changed slightly. She wasn't with me, he said slowly, but she works 2 blocks from it. And I told her, last week, in one of the messages I shouldn't have answered. I told her I was planning to do something for the 1 week. I told her I was going to bring home champagne. The room was very quiet. Tell the detective, I said. He told the detective. The lab results came back the next morning. The substance was aconitine, a plant alkaloid, the toxicologist explained to me on the phone. Monkshood, wolfsbane, the old names for it, from when peasants used to put it on arrow tips. Tasteless in small dilutions. Lethal in not much larger. Detectable in blood and urine if you knew to look for it, which they had, because the symptoms were unusual enough to suggest something botanical. He was lucky, the doctor said. He had not received the full dose. There had been, the doctor said, an asymmetric distribution of the compound in the bottle. The aconitine had been concentrated in the upper layers of the wine, the part closest to the cork. It had been introduced, the forensics report would eventually say, by a needle, a very fine needle, of the kind used in certain laboratory work, pushed up through the wax foil and into the cork from the side at an angle, in a place where the foil had a natural crease, and where the puncture had then been disguised with a single careful drop of clear lacquer. The cork itself had a track in it that did not belong. The wax had been pricked, sealed, and re-pricked again to allow injection and venting. It had been done, the forensics tech told Reyes, by somebody who has done delicate work with their hands their whole life. The first glass poured from a bottle that has been doctored that way takes most of the dose. The second takes almost none. The third, none at all. The first glass had been mine. I had given it to him. I sat in our kitchen with the morning light coming in long pale bars across the counter, and I looked at the place where the 2 flutes had stood, and I thought, if I had not done as she said, if I had been a sensible woman, a rational woman, a woman who does not listen to strangers in coats on streets, I would be in the ground. I thought it again, more slowly, to be sure I had understood it. I would be in the ground. I sat there for a long time. Vivienne was arrested on a Thursday afternoon. They took her from her office. Reyes told me about it later, in a tone that I think he meant to be reassuring, and that I found instead made my skin go cold. She had not resisted. She had not seemed surprised. She had asked, very politely, whether she might be allowed to change her shoes before she left, because the ones she had on were not comfortable. They had let her change her shoes. She had walked out of the building behind them in flat black loafers, and she had not looked back at her colleagues, who had stood in the doorways of their offices and watched her go. At the station, she had denied it for about 90 minutes. Then she had asked for a glass of water. Then she had begun to talk and had not stopped for 3 hours. She had used the coffee shop meeting, she said, to handle the bottle. He hadn't realized. He had carried his bag in with him because he didn't like to leave anything in the car in that neighborhood. He had set it on the chair next to him. When he had gone to the counter to refill his coffee, he had refilled his coffee, hadn't he? He always did. She had had her hand in the bag for 30 seconds, maybe less. The bottle had been there in its paper wrapping. She had brought the syringe in a small zippered case in her purse, prepared, sealed, ready. She had pushed the needle through the foil at the place where the foil creased over the lip of the cork, where a small puncture would be invisible. She had injected. She had withdrawn. She had touched a fine bead of lacquer to the hole with the tip of a toothpick. The toothpick had gone back in her purse with the syringe. The bottle had gone back into his bag. She had been back in her seat before he turned around with his refilled cup. She had calculated the dose, she told them, for a woman of about my weight. She had researched me, she said. She had looked at the photographs from the wedding that one of his cousins had foolishly made public. She had known what I looked like. She had known where I worked. She had, she said, taken her time. When Reyes had asked her why, she had looked at him for a long moment and had said because he chose her, that was all. Because he chose her. In her apartment they found the syringe, washed but not washed enough. They found the small dark bottle of aconitine concentrate, labeled with a researcher's cautious, neat hand. They found a manila folder with my name printed across the tab in block capitals. Inside the folder were photographs of me, leaving my apartment, walking to the museum, coming out of the bakery on Beacon Street with a paper bag against my hip on the very afternoon. Tea of the woman in the gray coat. She had been close enough to take that picture. She had been close enough, perhaps, to have been standing somewhere within earshot when the woman in the gray coat stopped me. I stared at that photograph for a long time, and I tried, as I had been trying for weeks, to remember whether I had seen anyone else, anyone at all, behind the woman on the street that day. I never could. I never found the woman in the gray coat. I went back to that street a dozen times. I sat on the same bench for hours one rainy afternoon in November. I described her to the owner of the bookshop and to the woman who ran the closed-up flower stall when it was open again, and to the priest at the church on the corner, and to a homeless man who said he had been on that block every day for 11 years, and none of them had ever seen anyone who matched. She had said my name. She had known the brand. She had known the night. And she had vanished into a city that did not, as far as anyone could tell, contain her. Sometimes in bed, in the hour before sleep, I think about her. I think about whether she was a kind of premonition I am unwilling to call by its right name. I think about whether some small chamber of my own mind, alert to something I had not consciously seen, Vivienne perhaps, watching us at the museum gala the week before, or some scrap of paper in Daniel's coat I had registered without registering, had constructed a stranger to deliver to me what I already knew. I think about whether she was simply real and old and unwell and right by accident in the way the old and the unwell sometimes are. I think about all of it. I never quite settle on an answer. I have made my peace with not settling. Daniel came home from the hospital on a Tuesday, 12 days after he had gone in. He had lost 9 pounds. His skin had not yet got its color back. He stood in the doorway with a small bunch of dahlias, bruised plums again, and he looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who knew that he was being looked at by a woman who had counted his breaths in the dark and weighed them, and found him for a long, terrible hour, possibly guilty. "Elle," he said, "I'm so sorry. I know. I should have told you about her. Yes. Can you?" He stopped. He had been a man who could finish his sentences for as long as I had known him. He could not finish this one. I let him stand there for a long moment because I needed him to feel it. Then I took the flowers. "We're going to start again," I said. "From here, not from before. From here, and there will be no more secrets in this house, Daniel. Not one. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "And no more champagne, not for a long time." He almost laughed. Then he saw that I wasn't laughing, and he didn't either. We sat at the kitchen counter with the dahlias in a water glass between us. The autumn light was the same pale honey it had been a week and a half before, when I had stood here and chopped onions and tried to talk myself out of a stranger's warning. We did not drink anything. He held my hand. I let him. Somewhere beyond the windows, on a street I had walked 100 times since, the woman in the gray coat, if she existed, if she had ever existed, went on with whatever she did when she was not stopping young wives outside bakeries. I have come to believe, in the years since, that there are 2 kinds of luck in a life. There is the luck that arrives, and there is the luck you reach for. The luck I was given that afternoon was the smallest possible kind. A hand on my wrist, 20 seconds on a street corner. A sentence I was free to ignore. The rest of it, the swapped glasses, the silence at the dinner, the long night counting another person's breaths, that part I did myself. I think about that sometimes when people ask me, as people occasionally still do, what saved me. It was not the woman. The woman only spoke. It was that I listened.